Ciao e bentornati, welcome back to Pillole D'Italiano. Nell'episodio di oggi voglio parlare di 15 consigli che do frequentemente a persone che vogliono imparare una lingua, italiano o qualsiasi altra lingua, ma che sono molto impegnate. I personally compiled this list of 15 language learning tips for busy people with my clients in mind, but then I figured that it could be helpful for you too, so consider it my treat. I'm sure that you will appreciate all of these recommendations, but let's start with number one. Tip number one is divide and conquer. So what you want to do is take your target language, it doesn't really matter which one you picked, and you want to divide it into manageable chunks to avoid overwhelm. Because as we all know, learning a new language requires a lot of skills. You have to memorize a lot of vocabulary and new grammatical structures, pronunciation, maybe even a new alphabet, so it could be overwhelming. My recommendation is to divide it in manageable chunks so that you avoid freaking out. If you don't know where to start, there are wonderful coaches out there, I'm one of them, that will be more than happy to help you figure it out and come up with a schedule that is manageable for you and your time commitment. And also a coach will help you set SMART goals on a regular basis, which are essential if you want to make any type of progress. If you don't know what a SMART goal is, SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. Tip number two is a little every day goes a long way. A lot of people tend to cram and study one day a week, maybe two, and not really do anything else for the rest of the week. Well, it is actually way more effective to create a daily language learning practice so that you can allocate, even if it's just half an hour per day, but a little consistent slot and chunk of time to the study of your language of choice every single day is going to be way more effective for a number of reasons. First of all, when you condense all of your study time in one day and you sit for hours, you're not as effective and as productive. It's just human nature to have our attention level really drop after a little while, usually after half an hour to 45 minutes. And the other reason why a daily practice beats cramming and studying only one day out of the week is that by exposing yourself to the language and doing something with it every day, you're creating a very prolific environment which fosters that spaced repetition so that the same word structures and sentences will not be forgotten by the time you sit down and you have your next language learning session. Tip number three is about comprehensible input. What does that mean? Well, input is any type of source that gives you information, that puts them in your head. So audio sources, video sources, written sources, anything that you would consider passive, in a sense that you don't have to actively participate in speaking or writing, that will be your input. Now, input is amazing because you can basically expose yourself to your target language almost 24/7, I mean, except for when you're sleeping, by having radio on at all times or the TV, and that's wonderful to get exposed to the sound of the language, getting familiar with some words. But when I talk about comprehensible input, for the time that you are actively paying attention, it needs to be a source that you somewhat understand. Because if it goes too much over your head, if it's not comprehensible, you're completely lost. It's just good for pronunciation and for the sound of the language, but it's not going to make you improve or even make you want to come back if you feel frustrated. You know what I mean? So focus on the sources where, without using a dictionary, you understand somewhat half of it, 60% of it, where you can follow along, kind of understanding what's going on, even if you do not know all of the grammatical structures, even if you do not understand all the words, but you can follow along a little bit. Tip number four is relax. Yeah, I know what it sounds like when somebody tells you to relax and you tense even more. Well, what I mean by relaxing is a couple of things, is to trust the process, first of all. It might take a little while and it's okay, especially if you're a complete beginner. And also you have to stop stressing about the fact that you do not understand. not trying to understand everything. You know, when you're trying so hard, you're putting some effort and there is tension in your body or in your mind. That's what I mean by relax. So if you're even laying down and super relaxed physically, that might actually help you acquire more and more easily the language that you're trying to learn. But it's not necessary for you to just lay still when you're learning a language. So you could be walking around or doing something else as you're listening to a podcast, for example. That's fine. So when I say relax, I mainly mean get comfortable being uncomfortable and get comfortable with the idea of not understanding everything and maybe feeling like you're a little baby or a young child in that target language, because it's absolutely normal. Tip number 5 is keep it interesting. And I would also add, keep it relevant. What do I mean by keep it interesting? Choose sources, especially for input, that are relevant to you, that you're interested in. Do not force yourself to read the news in your target language if you don't feel like reading about politics. Do not force yourself to watch a match on TV if you don't care about that sport. So the best thing you could do to actually keep it interesting is to choose the things that you're already interested in. If you love watching movies, great. Choose movies in your target language. You're already enjoying the activity of watching a movie. If you instead are really into reading books, awesome. So pick a book in a topic that you will be interested in your target language. And also, if you're somebody who is really just interested in speaking the language, don't worry about writing, especially at the beginning. Don't add that to your plate. Don't make that plate even heavier. Tip number 6, pens down. Forget about writing until you're semi-fluent in your target language. Why am I saying this? I'm not saying that writing is not important, and I'm sure that in some languages it is more relevant than others, but generally speaking, I would say that what I observed as a language coach is people hiding behind their writing over and over again. Because what happens is that when you write, you can slow it down and you maybe feel more comfortable with the pace in creating sentences, for example, because you can slow it down, you can think it through. Well, what happens is that when you train yourself at being creative in a target language at that speed, and then you start speaking, you will be so frustrated at yourself because you feel like you're a sloth, you're so slow. And oftentimes you feel you are slower than you actually are. So it's more of an internal feeling, but it is a great exercise to just start speaking. Almost right off the bat, I encourage people to start speaking in very simple sentences from day one. And then if you want, you can write your sentences down, but I would just recommend you to put that pen down. Don't even worry about it for the time being. Tip number 7, learn the natural way. What is the natural way? Well, it is the way that you naturally learned your mother tongue. Through your parents and relatives that were around you when you were a baby. You learn by listening, you learn by replicating sounds. You definitely did not learn by opening a grammar book and writing sentences and doing grammar drills over and over again. Those things could be helpful later on. If you are passionate about grammar, by all means do it, but don't feel that that's the way to go about it. And also, there is not such a thing as a set order for things to be introduced grammar-wise. So if you take, I'm thinking about Italian because that's my specialty, but if you take an Italian grammar book, oftentimes you open it and you start with articles. That's like the first thing that hits you. And Italian articles can be a bit complex, and I don't tend to focus on them right off the bat. It's more something that I encourage my clients to acquire naturally by searching and expanding their vocabulary, by looking up words that they're interested in learning and just pairing it up with the article that goes with it. So that little by little, they will naturally develop that sense that native speakers have for the right article to use, right? Which one and when. So that's what I mean by learn the natural way. Tip number 8, spice it up, especially when it comes to output, when it comes to those wonderful sentences that I always encourage my clients to create from scratch. And what do I mean by spicing it up? I mean that if you just learn a concept, how to say I like in your target language, for example, you can spice it up by creating sentences where you say, I like to swim, I like to drink coffee, I don't like to go to sleep late. Whatever that is, whichever level you're more comfortable at, you see how you're still using the same I like, or the negative form I don't like, but you're spicing it up so that by practicing even the same grammatical structure, it doesn't feel like a grammar drill and you will not get bored. Tip number 9, ditch the grammar book. And I'm serious. Sometimes I tell my clients, just go and burn that grammar book. You will not need it. If you need to check something up, there is the wonderful world of internet. There are tutors, there are coaches out there, people that can assist you. If you want to keep a grammar book at home as a reference, just use it for that specific purpose as a reference point. When you need to look something up and you need some clarity, go and check it, but don't use it as a starting point to guide you in your language learning. You're just gonna make it so boring and so stiff for yourself. Also, when it comes to living languages, no one talks the same way that you will learn by reading a grammar book. You definitely don't want to be that speaker who goes around showing off their newly acquired language skills, but sounding as if they had swallowed a grammar book. You know what I mean? Just ditch it. Tip number 10, become a word collector. What does that mean? First of all, when it comes to acquiring new words in your target language and expanding your vocabulary, the last thing you want to do is to go and print out or just have them as reference. You know, those like long lists of vocabulary without any context. No. Usually what I recommend to all of my clients is to find the words, they naturally come to you, right? The words that you are missing to be able to say the things that you want to say. So you're taking a shower in the morning and you are talking to yourself in your target language, you're having these mental conversations, you might encounter a moment where you're just stuck there, like, oh, I'm missing the word for coffee machine. Let me go and see how you say coffee machine in my target language. And so as I was saying, once you have a few of these words, I would say 10 per day, no more, just cap it. You want to start using them in context, creating sentences around them, and use them as often as you can. Therefore, my recommendation will be to create sentences that are relevant, that you might need to use often. Tip number 11, look for conversation buddies. Conversation buddies are people that are fluent in your target language and they want to learn the language that you're fluent in. So for example, you're an English speaker and you want to learn Spanish, look for a Spanish speaker who wants to improve their English. My recommendation here is to be very consistent in terms of how often you guys will meet. Really be disciplined in creating a schedule. If you say that you're going to meet once a week, do it once a week. If you're saying that it's going to happen twice a week, be realistic, but then if you can make it happen, consistently make it happen. If you don't stick to a schedule, especially with 2 or multiple people involved, if there are families, then it's just a mess, and you know, next thing you know, you have skipped a month, and lack of consistency is just one of the worst culprit for lack of progress. And also, another recommendation will be to find somebody who is more or less at the same level as you are in their language. So if you're learning Spanish and they're learning English, find somebody who is at the same level of English as you are in Spanish. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, it's going to be very, very tempting for the person who is more advanced to talk most of the time and the other person just to barely correct them in their own native language, but not making any progress in the target one. Oh, and one last thing, when it comes to these language exchanges, also set a timer. Don't be afraid to be a stickler, but set a timer. If you're meeting for an hour, you set a timer for half an hour, and during that first half an hour, you're only going to speak, say, Spanish, both of you. And then when the timer goes off, you set it again, and for the second half an hour, both of you will only speak English. I know you might already feel uncomfortable thinking about it, like, oh, there is no escape during that half an hour, but that's when the struggle happens, that's when real progress begins. Tip number 12 is listen to your conversations again. I know that this one sounds a bit weird, but what do I mean by it? It is very, very useful if when you meet with your language buddy or with your coach or tutor, you record those interactions and then you listen to the recording again and again and again, especially when you get feedback. It is essential for a bunch of different reasons. Studies show that even for native speakers, kids for example, when they're learning their own native language, it takes between 40 to 50 repetitions to finally be able to learn that word and store it in your long-term memory and then reuse it. Don't even get me started with grammatical structures. That's why it's so important to re-listen to the conversations, especially when you get feedback, especially when you have corrections, so that you can then practice again the corrected version. And this way you will really boost that memorization process. So I know that it sounds a bit weird to record conversations and to listen to them over and over again, but it is extremely useful. Tip number 13, have shadow conversations. What are shadow conversations, you might ask? Are those very useful practices that will help you improve your pronunciation in your target language. So the way it works is that you take any type of oral source for your target language. Say that you want to listen to a podcast, you start listening to it. Even if you do not understand a thing, even if it's your first day, I actually recommend doing this very early on in your practice, and then you will notice how you will need to do it less and less. But yes, even on day one, you start listening to something. If you don't understand a thing, you might want to pause it after 2 seconds and just try and reproduce the sounds that you just heard. Then you go back, you listen to it again, and try reproducing them again and again and again. This will help you get into the musicality of the language, especially if you want to train your ear to even hear and perceive sounds that do not belong to your native language. It is a very useful way to go about it. So think of it as learning a new song, because it's exactly the same thing. When you're learning a new language, you have to get into a different rhythm. You have to listen and replicate the sounds that are different from your native language. This is going to eventually help you almost eliminate your original accent. Not that there is anything wrong with having an accent, by the way. I do have one and I'm proud of it. But it will help native speakers understand you better if you pronounce words in a way that is more similar to the way that they pronounce it. As simple as that. So have those shadow conversations. Those are super useful when it comes to single words, and especially when it comes to words that are strung together in a sentence or even half a sentence, because you get into the intonation. Tip number 14, do not get lost in translation. What do I mean by that? When you watch a movie or a TV show in your target language, the temptation will be to use subtitles that are in your native language so that you can read and understand everything that is going on, right? Yeah, no, don't do that. What happens is that we cannot really multitask. That's just a myth. So every time you have multiple sources, for example, an audio source in your target language and a written source in your native language, the only thing you could do is to switch task very quickly, which is super tiring and also energy consuming, and also not effective, because in the moment that you're reading, you're not really listening, and vice versa. So the best thing you could do is to match the subtitle to the language that is spoken. So your target language is Spanish, you need to have Spanish subtitles. If your target language is Italian, you need to have Italian subtitles. Yes, this will make watching that TV show or that movie in your target language a bit more challenging for sure, but growth only happens during those moments of struggle. There is no growth if you're comfortably sitting on the couch, not challenging yourself. So if you mean business and you're really serious about acquiring that second or third language, switch those subtitles. They need to match the target language. Last but not least, tip number 15 is have fun. This should be the easiest thing on the list, and it's also one of the most crucial, because so many times I heard people telling me that they tried X, Y, or Z, this program or this app, and one of the main reasons why they quote-unquote failed, or maybe the program or the app failed them actually, is because it was not fun and it was not interesting and they did not want to go back for more. Hence, it's super duper important to have fun. And on this note, let me also throw in that it is essential to celebrate those little victories and those mistakes that you're making. Yes, celebrate those mistakes too. Have fun and celebrate even when you make those mistakes, because that's actually the only way that you can learn. So there is no reason why you should not celebrate your mistakes. Allora, che ne pensate? What did you think of this episode? Hopefully you enjoyed it. I also thought that it might be useful for you to have a printable PDF version of this list. So you will find a link in the description of this episode below where you can go and click on it, download the PDF, print it out. I don't know if you have a little vision board or little Italian language learning corner or shrine. Anyway, you do whatever you want with it. Have fun as per my last tip. Yeah, and leave a comment in the comment section below if you need help with anything, if you need additional clarification. I'm also going to put a link that you could use to book a call with me in case you want to chit-chat in person, or I mean online, but you get it, live. Okay, adesso vi lascio andare. Now I'll let you go. Just don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel if you're new to it or if by any chance you haven't done it yet. E noi ci vediamo settimana prossima. I'll see you super soon. Ciao, a presto!